completely ruined my car!
Dispatch, we need immediate assistance at the north gate. Serious injuries reported.
You know, there's a specific sound that happens when 40 tons of American steel meets 3 tons of German engineering. It's not a crash, it's more of a crunch, a sickening final sound like stepping on a giant beetle. And when my matte granite dump truck rolled over Sylvia Sterling's pristine silver Porsche Cayenne, the silence that followed was louder than the engine brake. It was the sound of a 2-year war finally ending, not with a handshake, but with a lesson in physics that the entire subdivision of the sanctuary at Silver Lake would never forget. My name is Elias Thorne, and I run Thorne Stone and Gravel, a family business that's been digging rock out of the earth since before these gated communities were even a sparkle in a developer's eye. We operate on a 100-acre slice of rugged land in the Ozarks, accessible only by a single, narrow gravel spine that cuts right through the manicured lawns of the sanctuary, a road that my grandfather deeded and paid for back in 1952, long before the HOA put up their iron gates and started measuring grass height with rulers. For a decade, I lived in an uneasy truce with the residents. I kept my trucks slow, I kept the dust down, and I never ran before dawn, mostly just trying to be a decent neighbor to folks who looked at my work boots like they were covered in radioactive waste. But then came Sylvia Sterling, a woman who didn't just move into the biggest house at the end of the cul-de-sac. She descended upon it like a colonial governor arriving to civilize the savages. Sylvia was the newly minted president of the HOA, a woman who wore white linen pants to walk her dog and looked at the world through the lens of property value and aesthetic harmony. She drove that silver Porsche like a weapon, weaving through the neighborhood with a sense of ownership that extended far beyond her property lines. And it didn't take long for her gaze to land on my dusty, rattling dump trucks chugging up the easement road past her rose bushes. The first time we met, I was greasing the hydraulics on my excavator near the gate, wiping sweat off my neck when she pulled up, blocking the entire width of my access road. She rolled down the window just enough to let her voice out, but keep the air conditioning in, and told me that my industrial parade was disrupting the feng shui of the community entrance. I tried to be polite. I took off my hat, explained that this road was a deeded easement, private property that I maintained myself, and that I had a business to run. But she just looked at me over the rim of her sunglasses and said, "We'll see about that, Mr. Thorne." Aesthetic integrity is a binding clause. Before rolling up the window and sitting there for another 10 minutes while checking emails, forcing me to wait in the cab of my truck, engine idling, burning diesel and patience in equal measure, I thought that was just a bad introduction. A little friction between the old world and the new, but I was naive. Because folks like Sylvia don't stop at friction, they want erasure. Within a week, I started getting fines in the mail, official-looking letters on heavy cream paper with gold leaf letterhead, citing me for excessive noise, visual blight, and unauthorized commercial activity in a residential zone, which was laughable because my quarry was zoned industrial 50 years ago. But the fines weren't the point. The point was the harassment, the slow drip of bureaucracy designed to make me snap. I called the HOA office. I sent emails with copies of my deed. I even went to a town hall meeting where Sylvia presided from a podium like a judge, silencing me with a gavel every time I tried to speak about grandfather clauses and property rights. She'd smile that tight, synthetic smile and say, "Mr. Thorne, we are simply trying to elevate the standard of living for everyone. Surely you can understand that a rock quarry is incompatible with modern luxury living." But the real war began on a Tuesday in November, a day I'll never forget because the sky was that steel gray color that promises a hard freeze. I was coming back from a drop-off with an empty flatbed, ready to load up for the morning, when I saw the silver Porsche parked dead center across my cattle guard, right at the choke point where my gravel road meets their asphalt, blocking the only way in or out of my land. I honked the air horn, a deep, chest-rattling blast that usually sends deer scattering. But nothing moved. The car was empty, locked, gleaming under the overcast sky like a monument to entitlement. I hopped out, checked the house, knocked on her door, but nobody answered. So I called the towing company, a local outfit run by a buddy of mine named Jim. But when Jim heard the address, He sighed and said, "Elias, I can't touch it. She's got the sheriff convinced that the easement is disputed territory. Says if we tow a resident's car from community access points, she'll sue us for theft and damages. She's already threatened to bankrupt the last guy who touched her bumper." I called the non-emergency line, and a deputy came out, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He looked at my deed, looked at the Porsche, and then looked at his boots, muttering about it being a civil matter, and how without a court order determining the exact boundary inches, he couldn't authorize a forced removal of a vehicle that wasn't blocking a public highway. Basically telling me I was on my own because nobody wanted to poke the hornet's nest. That was Sylvia Sterling. I sat there for hours of lost sunlight, until Sylvia finally strolled out of the community clubhouse with a yoga mat under her arm, acting surprised to see a 30-foot truck idling at her bumper. "Oh, Elias," she said, using my first name like a scolding teacher. "I simply couldn't find a spot near the clubhouse, and I assumed you were done for the day. You really shouldn't work such long hours. It's bad for the neighborhood tranquility." I didn't yell, I didn't scream, though the urge to rip that cattle guard out of the ground was strong. I just looked at her and said, "Sylvia, this is a working road. If you block it again, you're going to regret it." And she just laughed, a tinkling, dismissive sound, and said, "Don't be dramatic, it's just a driveway. Share the space," before lazily getting in her car and taking another 5 minutes to adjust her mirrors before moving. That was the moment the dynamic shifted. She didn't see a man who owned the land. She saw a nuisance she could bully into submission, and she ramped it up. She started hosting mindfulness gatherings on my easement, setting up folding chairs and herbal tea stations right in the path of my trucks, claiming the energy vortex was strongest there, forcing my drivers to lay on their horns until her guests scatteringly moved, casting dirty looks at us like we were the intruders. But the breaking point, the moment that took this from a property dispute to a blood feud, happened 2 weeks later involving my grandpop. Silas, the old man, is 88, stubborn as the granite we mine, and lives in the original homestead on the quarry grounds. He's on dialysis and has a visiting nurse come 3 times a week. Well, that Wednesday, Silas collapsed in the kitchen. Couldn't breathe, chest tight, real bad shape. The nurse called 911 and then called me in a panic. I was in town picking up parts, so I raced back doing 80 on the highway, praying I wasn't too late. But when I turned onto the main road leading to the gate, I saw the flashing lights of the ambulance stopped right at my cattle guard. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled up, and there it was, that silver Porsche, parked diagonally across the entrance. Looking abandoned, the paramedics were scrambling, trying to get the gurney over the cattle guard and up the gravel incline on foot, because they couldn't squeeze the ambulance past her bumper. Every second counted. Every breath my grandfather struggled for was a second Sylvia Sterling had stolen with her. Arrogance. I jumped out of my truck, screaming for her, banging on her front door until the wood nearly splintered. But the house was dark. She was gone, probably at a brunch or a spa, completely oblivious to the fact that her parking spot was killing a man. We managed barely to get Silas into the ambulance by carrying him down the muddy embankment, slipping and sliding, the paramedics cursing the whole way. And by the time they got him hooked up and stabilized in the hospital, the doctor told me, "Elias, another 10 minutes, and this would be a different conversation." I sat in that hospital waiting room, staring at the scuffed linoleum, smelling the antiseptic, and I felt something inside me harden, something that used to be patience turning into cold. Heavy resolve. This wasn't about visual blight anymore. This was about survival. She had endangered my blood. She had turned my property into her plaything, and the law had shrugged its shoulders. When I got home that night, exhausted and smelling of hospital coffee, I found a note on my gate, not an apology, but a citation from the HOA for emergency vehicle disturbance and creating a panic scene, claiming the ambulance lights had disturbed the visual serenity of the midday atmosphere. That piece of paper was the match that lit the fuse. I walked into my office, pulled out every file, every deed, every survey map from 1952, and I called my lawyer, Old Man Reynolds, a guy who's been practicing property law since the ink was wet on the Constitution. I told him, Reynolds, I'm done playing nice. I want to go nuclear. But I want to do it so legally. So buy the book, that when the dust settles, she won't even have a shadow left to stand on. Reynolds listened, asking quiet questions. And then he chuckled, a dry, dusty sound. Elias, he said, if you want to clear the road, you got to treat it like a business transaction. You give notice, you give warning, and then you proceed with your lawful commerce. If an obstruction remains after due diligence, well, that's just a workplace hazard. We spent the next week drafting the trap. It wasn't a trap in the illegal sense. It was a compliance nightmare for her. I sent a certified letter, return receipt requested, to Sylvia Sterling and the HOA board, explicitly stating that on Monday, December 12th, at 7 a.m. sharp, Thorn stone and gravel would be transporting a super load, a massive 20-ton slab of raw granite destined for a municipal monument, and that the access road must be clear of all obstructions to a width of 20 feet. I didn't stop there. I posted signs, huge, ugly, reflective orange construction signs that you can't miss unless you're blind, or willfully ignorant, stake them right into the ground every 50 feet along the easement. Caution, heavy hauling operation scheduled. 12/12, 7 a.m., no parking, tow-away zone, risk of crushing. I took photos of the signs with timestamps. I video recorded myself dropping the letters at the post office. I even paid for a legal notice in the local county paper, burying it in the back pages, but making it public record. I covered every inch of legal ground, creating a fortress of documentation that said, "You have been warned." The days ticked down, and Sylvia ignored it all. She actually tore down one of the signs and left it in my mailbox with a note saying, "Remove this trash immediately. It violates the color palette of the subdivision," which was perfect because I bagged that note as evidence of her acknowledging the sign's existence. She thought I was bluffing. She thought I was just some dirty fingernailed laborer trying to scare her. She didn't understand that when you work with stone, you learn that the hardest things break not by force, but by finding the fault line and applying pressure until nature takes its course. Sunday night, the night before the haul, I didn't sleep much. I spent the evening checking the Mack, my biggest truck, the beast we call it, checking the air brakes, the tires, the massive steel bumper that looked like a battering ram. I loaded the granite slab, securing it with chains that were thick as my wrist. The truck weighed in at nearly 80,000 pounds fully loaded, a rolling earthquake. I stood on my porch, looking down the hill at the lights of the sanctuary, seeing the faint blue glow of televisions in million-dollar living rooms. And I wondered if Sylvia was down there, sipping her wine, thinking she had won, thinking the world would always bend around her because it always had. The morning of the 12th broke cold and clear, the kind of crisp Ozark morning where your breath hangs in the air like smoke. I climbed into the cab of the Mack at 6:30 a.m., the diesel engine roaring to life, shaking the birds out of the trees. My crew was there, silent and grim. They knew what was coming. I had Deputy Miller on speed dial not to help me, but to witness. I had already texted him, commencing heavy haul operation as noticed. 700 hours, I eased the truck into gear, the low growl of the transmission vibrating through the floorboards, and began the slow, heavy descent down the gravel road toward the gate, toward the conflict, toward the end of the truce dot. As I rounded the final bend, the sun just peeking over the ridge, blindingly bright, I saw it the silver Porsche, parked in the exact same spot as before, maybe even a little more centered this time. Almost defiant, Sylvia wasn't in it, but she was standing nearby with a contractor, pointing at my cattle guard, holding a clipboard, probably planning to replace my gate with a flower bed. I pulled the air horn, a long, mournful blast that echoed off the valley walls, signaling the start of the shift, signaling the end of her reign. I checked my dash cam green light, recording. I checked my side mirrors, checked the time, 6:59 a.m. I stopped the truck 20 feet from her car, the grill of the Mack looming over her low-slung SUV like a predator. Sylvia looked up, annoyed, shielding her eyes from the sun, and waved her hand dismissively, mouthing the words, go around, as if I could take an 80,000-pound truck off-road into a drainage ditch. I rolled down the window and shouted, "Move the vehicle, Sylvia. This is a scheduled commercial haul. You have 60 seconds." She shouted back, her voice shrill and thin in the cold air. "I'm meeting with a landscaper. Wait your turn. You can't just bully your way through." I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I just rolled the window up, watching the second hand on my watch sweep past the 12:07 a.m. I engaged the low gear, released the parking brake, and let the truck creep forward. The massive tires crunching the gravel, slow, inevitable, terrifyingly heavy. Sylvia didn't move the car. She stood there, hands on her hips, assuming I would stop, assuming the game of chicken would end with me blinking, because in her world, people always stopped for her. She didn't understand that I wasn't playing a game anymore. I was executing a lawful operation on a deeded right-of-way. And as the distance closed 10 feet, 5 feet, to feet, her expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. And then, finally, to pure, unadulterated horror. She screamed, a sound that pierced even the thick glass of my cab, and scrambled backward, dropping her clipboard into the mud, waving her arms like she could physically push the air to stop the machine. But I didn't touch the brake. I held the wheel steady, my eyes fixed on the hood ornament of that Porsche, watching it disappear beneath the massive steel bumper of the Mac. The contact wasn't violent in a fast way. It was slow, grinding, and absolute. The truck's bumper caught the grill of the Porsche and simply erased it. There was a groan of metal, a pop of plastic shattering, and then the sickening crunch of the hood folding in on itself like a piece of tin foil. I kept moving, maintaining a steady 2 miles per hour. Torque doing the work that speed usually does. The dump truck pushed the SUV. The Porsche's tires locked and skidding across the gravel, dragging furrows into the earth. The German engineering screaming in protest as the frame twisted. Sylvia was shrieking, running alongside the wreckage but staying clear of the wheels, shouting things I couldn't hear but could read on her contorted face. "Stop, you maniac. My car, my car." But I didn't stop. I pushed that $80,000 paperweight another 15 feet, grinding it sideways until it was shoved clear off the gravel road and into the drainage ditch that ran alongside the easement. The Porsche tipped, sliding awkwardly into the muck, the front end completely mangled, headlights looking like crushed eyes, steam hissing from the radiator. And only then, when the road was fully clear, did I engage the air brakes. Shot. The sound was like a gavel coming down. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, feeling the adrenaline vibrate in my fingertips. Not fear, but the intense clarity of a man who has just crossed a point of no return. I opened the door and climbed down, the heavy thud of my boots on the ground drawing the eyes of the small crowd that had gathered. Sylvia's landscaper looked like he was about to faint, clutching his tape measure like a crucifix, and a few neighbors, who were walking their dogs, stood frozen, phones raised, recording the whole thing. Sylvia rushed at me, her face splotchy red, tears streaming down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. "You monster," she screamed, lunging as if she wanted to scratch my eyes out. "You destroyed my car. You tried to kill me. I'll have you buried under the jail. Do you hear me? I own this town." I stood my ground, calm, almost scary calm, and pointed a calloused finger at the sign not 10 feet away from where her car used to be. "Read the sign, Sylvia," I said, my voice low and gravelly, carrying over her hysteria. "Heavy haul scheduled. Warning posted. You were notified by certified mail. You were notified by the sheriff. You blocked a commercial right-of-way during active operations. That's on you." Just then, the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, blue lights flashing silently. Deputy Miller stepped out, adjusting his belt, looking at the scene with a mixture of awe and exhaustion. Sylvia ran to him, grabbing his uniform sleeve. "Arrest him. Arrest him right now. Look what he did. It's assault with a deadly weapon. It's vandalism." Miller gently peeled her hand off his arm and walked over to the Porsche, inspecting the damage. Then he looked at the skid marks, then at my truck, and finally at me. "Elias," he said, nodding. "Everyone okay?" "Nobody hurt, Miller," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out a folded packet of papers. "Here's the haul permit, the certified mail receipts signed by Mrs. Sterling, the time-stamped photos of the signage, and the dashcam footage is backed up to the cloud as we speak." I gave her 60 seconds to move. She refused compliance on a hazardous worksite. Sylvia was gasping for air. Worksite. This is a neighborhood. He can't just. Miller held up a hand, silencing her. Actually, ma'am, technically, once those signs go up and the permit is active, this easement becomes a commercial zone under state statutes regarding heavy industry transport. You were parked illegally in a marked hazard zone. He looked at the crushed Porsche, then back at her. This is a civil dispute, Mrs. Sterling. Elias here gave legal notice. You ignored it. I can't arrest a man for clearing an obstruction on his own deeded land. After following every letter of the law, the color drained from Sylvia's face so fast I thought she might faint. Civil. She whispered, but my car is now a tow job, Miller finished. And frankly, ma'am, you're lucky he didn't sue you for the delay time on that rig. Those idle hours are expensive. The aftermath was exactly what old man Reynolds had predicted. Messy, loud, but ultimately futile for her. Sylvia sued. Of course, she hired a high-priced firm from the city, throwing around words like emotional distress and malicious intent. But when it got to the deposition, Reynolds laid out our evidence like a royal flush. We had the video of her acknowledging the signs, the video of her blocking the ambulance, which the judge did not like one bit, and the recorded warning I gave her moments before the impact. Her insurance company, usually eager to fight, took one look at the gross negligence clause in her policy, and the fact that she willfully parked in a posted heavy equipment path, and sent her a letter that basically said, "You're on your own." They denied her claim, but the real justice wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the sanctuary. The video of the crush went viral locally. Some kid walking his golden retriever had live-streamed it. And suddenly, the queen of the cul-de-sac was the laughing stock of the county. The neighbors, the ones she had fined for leaving trash cans out 10 minutes too long or for planting the wrong shade of marigolds, started to look at me differently. They waved when I drove by. One guy, a retired pilot living 3 doors down from Sylvia, actually stopped me at the gas station and bought my coffee. "Best damn thing I've seen in 20 years, he told me. She tried to fine me for washing my boat in my own driveway. You did what we all wanted to do. Sylvia didn't last long after that. The humiliation of driving a rental Ford Focus while her lawsuit crumbled was too much for her ego. Plus, the HOA board, sensing blood in the water and terrified of being named accomplices in a countersuit for harassment, which Reynolds had threatened, voted to remove her as president. They stripped her of her gavel, her title, and her power. About 6 months later, a for sale sign went up in front of her house, and by the time the moving vans came, the silence returning to the neighborhood was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. My grandpa, Silas, pulled through, by the way. He's back in his rocking chair on the porch, watching the trucks roll in and out. When I told him the story, showed him the video of the Porsche crumpling like a soda can, he just laughed his wheezy laugh and said, "That's the thing about stone, Elias. It don't mind waiting. It's been here a million years. It can wait for a plastic car to get out of the way, or it can go right through it. Choice is theirs." Now, when I drive my Mac down that easement road, past the manicured lawns and the gates, nobody blocks the way. The new neighbors give me plenty of space, sometimes a nod of respect. I keep the signs up, though, private road, heavy haul area, just as a reminder that boundaries aren't just lines on a map. They're agreements between people, and when you break that agreement, when you think your convenience is worth more than another man's livelihood or life, well, sometimes reality comes rolling down the hill in low gear, weighing 80,000 pounds, ready to teach you the difference between what you think you're entitled to and what can actually be crushed. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? We live in a world where people think the rules don't apply to them until the moment the bumper hits the grill. Was I right to crush that car? The law says yes. My conscience says yes. But I know there are folks out there who think property is more important than principle, who think I should have just waited another day, another week, bowed down to the lady in the Porsche. What would you have done? Would you have backed down, or would you have shifted into gear and cleared the road? Let me know what you think, because out here in the quarry, we don't deal in gray areas, only hard rock and the truth.